Chairship. I'd like to start by thanking the Petitions Committee and the member for Linlithgow and East Falkirk for opening this debate, and I'd also like to pay tribute to the many tens of thousands who secured the debate through the petition process. What a great example of democracy in action. We've heard so many memorable and passionate contributions today, and I look forward to the Minister setting out what actions the government will be taking. I'd particularly like to thank other contributions to the debate, not least from my 11 honourable friends who have, on these benches, who have contributed to the debate today and made some truly compelling arguments. The fact that the overwhelming majority of contributions to the debate today have come from the Labour benches shows how hugely important this issue is to our party. The farmers' protests taking place in Delhi, of course, relate to 3 new agricultural laws which affect farmers. Taken together, they loosen the rules around the sale, pricing and storage of farm produce. They allow private buyers to stockpile essential commodities for future sale, and they set out rules for contract farming. The legislation is, of course, deeply controversial, and opposition figures and the protesting farmers have complained that there was insufficient consultation. The ongoing protests on the outskirts of Delhi illustrate the strength of feeling and the level of anger that so many members of the farming community feel. And Prime Minister Modi will by now be acutely aware of the backlash against his policies. But Mr. Stringer, India is a sovereign democratic nation, and its agriculture laws are a domestic matter. In a democracy, there will always be different views on the right course of action to take, and we acknowledge and fully respect that those views are held passionately by many British Indians and those who retain close ties to India. But as this is a domestic issue, it would not be appropriate for the UK Labour Party to comment on the specifics of the legislation itself, and so I will not be doing so today. However, since the first worrying evidence of escalating violence emerged, we on these benches have been urging the Indian authorities to protect and to defend the universal human rights of all those protesting in India. And I can assure honourable members gathered here today that we shall continue to do so without fear or favour. The Labour Party's foreign policy puts the rule of law, democracy and universal human rights and freedoms at the very heart of our global agenda. And we call for these principles to be upheld consistently in every country across the world. So let me stress in absolute terms that the Labour front bench stands firmly behind the rights of Indian farmers to exercise their right to freedom of assembly, freedom of expression and the right to peaceful protest. This is why on the 1st of February I issued a statement in which I drew attention to the escalating violence and the clashes between the farmers and police and the threat to essential democratic rights. I called on both sides to show restraint, but made clear that the onus is on the Indian authorities to protect the farmers' right to peaceful protest, to respect their right to freedom of assembly and expression, and to respond to any incidents of civil disobedience in a proportionate and appropriate manner. For instance, we are deeply concerned about reports of live ammunition being used by the police. And we, of course, call on demonstrators to keep their protests peaceful and within the constraints of the law. The Red Fort incident on the 26th of January is an example of where both sides must understand the limits of what is acceptable and that certain actions are likely to provoke outrage and escalation. In recent weeks, campaigners have been particularly concerned about the Indian authorities' disregard for freedom of expression and specifically for media freedoms. Human Rights Watch have stated that during these protests, the authorities have introduced politically motivated charges against activists and charged journalists and opposition politicians with sedition simply for reporting on claims made by the family of a dead protester. And following the Red Fort clashes between protesters and police, the Indian government shut off the internet as a way of curbing the protest. suspending 4G mobile internet services in 3 areas around Delhi, where tens of thousands of protesting farmers are camping. Services were restored, but it is clear that bans of this sort violate basic freedoms. The Labour Party therefore calls on the Indian authorities to recognise the vitally important role that independent journalism plays within a democracy and to protect its journalists from reprisals. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend. In terms of independence and the link between the government and certain celebrities, the farcical manner in which some Indian actors and cricketers copy-pasted the official government line simultaneously onto their social media accounts not only exposed to a global audience the 2019 Cobra Post cash for tweet string operation, but severely dented their credibility and conscience. Does my honourable friend agree that if our government had issued such an edict within our country, they would have been laughed out of the country, and subsequently celebrities with a conscience would have tweeted out the exact opposite in defiance?
Stephen Kinnock?
I agree with my honourable friend that the media and social media should never be manipulated for such political purposes in terms of speaking through others in a way that is not clear in terms of where the originator of the message is coming from. And it's very important that the media is used as a neutral source of information rather than one that is loaded with a particular agenda. Another universal human right is that of religious freedom. Prime Minister Modi will be aware of the deep concern that protests by farmers about economic issues, which is what this is about, have resulted in a significant backlash against Sikhs. He will have seen the instances of government supporters holding rallies outside Sikh places of worship and the fear that this will have engendered. Mr. Modi must recognise his responsibility in line with international law to keep... I will give way.
Seema Malahatra?
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and indeed he'll be aware of the car rallies that were targeting Southall, Leicester and Birmingham just 2 weeks ago that caused great concern, and I do pay tribute to the Home Office and the police at that time. But does he agree with me that this is why it's so important that interfaith communities like Southall Interfaith Forum and Hounslow Interfaith Forum that came together at that time and had said that they stand firm against right-wing groups who want to harm our community? It's vital that we across the world defend our democracies and freedoms and protect our communities from attempts at this division.
Stephen Kinnock?
I agree absolutely with my honourable friend, and let's be clear that this must be seen as an economic and a political issue and debate, and that must never be allowed to tip into prejudice around people's faith or their ethnicity. It's vital that we keep this focused on the issue that the protesters are in fact protesting about, and Mr. Modi does need to recognise that the world is watching, and what happens in India, of course, resonates here in our country. He must recognise his responsibility in line with international law to keep the Sikh community safe and confident in India's law enforcement. This recognition is important for the individuals and families affected, but also for those of us who are so keen to see India flourish as the great, successful, multicultural nation that we know it to be. The UK government naturally and rightly values its trade relationship with India, which stands at more than £18 billion annually. But the UK-India relationship must be broader and deeper than just trade. It should be based on working in partnership on issues of security and climate change, but it critically must be about the joint promotion of democracy, human rights and upholding international law. On the 1st of February, I asked the Foreign Secretary to raise the issue of human rights with the Indian government. And today I urge the UK government to engage more actively and more urgently with New Delhi. With this, I ask the Minister, what steps has he taken to engage proactively with his counterparts in New Delhi to ensure the right to peaceful protest is being upheld? Second, what representations has he made to his Indian counterpart about the need to resolve this situation peacefully by working with all parts of Indian society, including trade unions, and the need to advance the negotiations that have stalled? Thirdly, will he publish a broader strategy to defend internet and media freedom, not just in India, but also in other places such as Belarus, Hong Kong and Uganda? Fourthly, what steps has the UK government taken to support the right of Amnesty International, which was recently forced to discontinue its operations in India? And finally, the invitation to join the G7 in Cornwall represents a significant development in India's role as a leading nation in global politics. Can the Minister confirm that the Prime Minister will be taking this opportunity to stress to Mr Modi the need for India to adhere to the high standards that are expected within the international community, in particular with regard to universal human rights and the rule of law? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Evans.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Stringer, and a pleasure to serve in your chairmanship under these new arrangements. And so far, so good. The technology appears to have worked very well. I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for Linlithgow and East Falkirk for introducing this debate here today in an excellent way. I pay tribute to the work the Honourable Member has done on the Petitions Committee. And I'm also very grateful to the contributions from all Honourable and Right Honourable members, many of whom have given very passionate speeches this afternoon, understandably so given the interest within Honourable and Right Honourable members' constituencies and their own personal connections with this part of India. And I'd also like to thank Councillor Gurchan Singh, who the Honourable Member for Oxford West and Abingdon rightly commended for initiating the petition and ultimately this debate. Now, there are clearly very strong feelings about the farmers' protests and press freedoms in India, both inside and outside of the House, as indicated by the fact that over 100,000 people have signed this petition, and can I thank every single one of them as well for taking such a keen interest in bringing this subject to the House. I will try and respond to as many of the points raised by honourable members as part of my remarks, but I am conscious I need to give the honourable member for Linlithgow and East Falkirk a few minutes before the end of this debate. He says, hurriedly looking at a clock to see how long we've got. Mr Stringer might give me a pointer at some point. So I can start by saying our officials from our network of high commissions in India have monitored and reported back on the protest in response to the agricultural reform laws ever since they first flared up in September. In January, the Indian Supreme Court suspended the reforms and established an expert committee to scrutinise the laws. We understand the committee has completed its consultations with concerned parties and will give a final report to the Supreme Court at the end of the month. We're also aware that the Indian government has met with farmers' unions on several occasions and that those talks remain inconclusive but are ongoing. Understandably, these events have caused alarm and uncertainty for many British people who have family ties to farming communities in India. The government's written response to this petition aimed to address those concerns while also making clear that agricultural policy is a domestic matter for the Indian government, as the Honourable Member for Aberavon, the official opposition spokesman, has also confirmed. However, the UK government believes firmly that freedom of speech, internet freedom, which has been raised by Wolverhampton, the Honourable Member for Wolverhampton South East and many others, alongside the right to peaceful protest, are vital to any democracy. And we also accept that if a protest crosses the line into illegality, security forces in a democracy have the right to enforce law and order in a proportionate way. We encourage all states to ensure that domestic laws and the way in which they are enforced must comply with international human rights standards. And in that spirit, we look to the Government of India to uphold the freedoms and rights guaranteed to its people by its constitution and by the international instruments to which India is party. Now, during the debate, concerns have also been raised by Right Honourable and Honourable members, including the members for Islington North, Peterborough, Ealing Southall, and the SNP spokesman for the Honourable Member for Argyll and Bute, about press freedom in India. And again, let me be clear that this government believes that an independent media is essential to any robust democracy. That's why we are committed to championing media freedom around the world, as is evident from our ambitious media freedom campaign that we launched in November 2018. India has a vibrant media scene which promotes lively debate across the political spectrum, and the UK government has worked to support this democratic tradition. For example, in 2019 we awarded scholarships on our flagship Achieving programme to 7 talented and aspiring young Indian journalists. And last year we supported the Thomson Reuters Foundation to run workshops for Indian journalists to help them report on human rights issues. Now, my colleague, Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, is the Minister responsible for both human rights and for our relations with India. He regularly discusses media freedom, including the Media Freedom Coalition, of which the UK is a founding member, with India's Minister of State for External Affairs. And members, honourable and right honourable members, will recognise that this is a time of great ambition for the UK's relationship with India. Both governments are working to advance shared priorities across trade and investment, health, sustainability and climate change, and defence and security. We're also working with India as a force for good on the UN Security Council and as one of the Prime Minister's guest countries at the G7 summit later this year in June. This cooperation will help us fix global problems, and it will strengthen prosperity and well-being in India and the UK. However, whilst this is an exciting time for the UK-India partnership, it does not hinder us from raising difficult issues. And a number of Right Honourable and Honourable members, including the members for Ilford, Hayes and Harlington, Birmingham, Perry Barr, raised the upcoming visit of the Prime Minister to India. This will be an opportunity to and discuss a range of bilateral issues with India where we have serious and specific concerns. We will raise them directly with the Indian government, as you'd expect of a friend and neighbour. Candid discussions are an important part of our mature and wide-ranging relationship with the Indian government. Now, I know the Honourable Lady for Oxford West and Abingdon and the Honourable Member for Aberavon wanted to know what further discussions the United Kingdom has had since the Foreign Secretary discussed the farmers' protest with his counterpart during his visit to India in December. Well, this month alone, senior Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office officials have met with the Indian High Commissioner and discussed this very thing, the UK parliamentary interest in the freedom of civil society groups, for example, to operate in India. And Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon speaks regularly to his counterparts in the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, as well as to the High Commissioner here in the UK. Human rights issues are an essential part of these conversations. The Honourable Member for Oxford West raised the issue about Article 9. We've not made an assessment of India's agricultural bills in relation to Article 9. I will certainly consult officials on this, but would stress again that these reforms are a domestic matter for India. The Honourable Member for Birmingham Hall Green raised the issue of sanctions. This sanctions regime, which we launched in July enables the UK to impose sanctions on those who commit serious human rights violations or abuses. It's not appropriate to speculate on who may be designated under the regime in the future, as to do so could very well reduce the impact. And again, the opposition spokesman raised the issue of Amnesty International in India. We raised this case with the High Commissioner on the 1st of December, and officials via Lord Ahmed, and our officials have raised our concerns most recently in November as well as December. So we've requested that Amnesty's accounts be unfrozen while the investigation is ongoing. In our contacts with the Government of India, we have noted the important role of organisations like Amnesty in a democracy.
Can the Minister bring his remarks to a conclusion?
I can.
Very quickly.
Thank you, Mr Stringer. Let me end by reassuring colleagues that the UK Government will continue to monitor developments relating to these protests incredibly closely, and where we have concerns, we will continue to raise them with the Indian Government while respecting the fact that these agricultural reforms are an internal